There you go. So where's Peter? Oh,
Yeah, it shows I'm on here.
it shows you're in?
Yeah.
How come you're not shown in there? Oh, duh. I knew that. Duh. I knew that. Good morning.
Just a quick, I'm Sharon Hayes.
Oh, hi,
And
Sharon.
I did have virus, but I'm cleared now.
Okay.
And I canceled for Tuesday. I don't know if it's still time that I could rejoin.
Well, we've already paid and we got the 15 tickets. There's no reason. Are you planning to drive directly anyway?
For me?
Are you and your husband planning to drive anyway?
Yes. We are.
Jan? Jan,
If I can't go, I
you can.
understand.
You can. Jan? This is Susan. She had originally canceled. She'd like to go now. So she and her husband will get there early and buy their own ticket. You just need to buy one ticket when you get there. Susan Hayes, her,
Oh, yeah, Sharon Hayes.
Sharon, I'm
I
sorry.
had this COVID. I thought I'd cancel just be on the safe side so you're not left hanging. And I canceled, but I was at the doctor this week. They said I'm clear. I don't, and I can be out.
So she can go. She's right. Her husband was going to go anyway
You want to go where?
to the photo shoot.
Oh, Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday. So all she has to do is buy, but all you have to do is buy your own ticket when you get there.
Yeah,
That's
you'll
all.
have
And
to
tell them
go
you're
there.
with the group.
You can't go in unless you've got a ticket.
Okay.
And so you'll have to get online and say you want to join our group at 10 a.m.
Okay.
and see if you get in, because there's no just turning up and there's botanical gardens anymore. You have to book every time you go.
Oh, then maybe it's something I have to do.
Yeah, so that, yeah, they won't do it. All occasions and everything else, they're letting people in at certain intervals.
Oh, let
so
me
they
see if
don't
I
have
can
too
do it
many
then.
people.
I'll have to see if I
And
can
he's
do it.
staying for lunch as well.
Yeah.
It's a little confusing.
I'll have to ask
Why can't she,
Betsy.
why
I
can't
don't
she
know how
just,
many-
you know, ask Betsy, I don't see why
Yeah.
she can't just show up with her husband.
We've only
And he's
got-
gonna have a ticket
we-
and
Yeah,
then she just,
she can just go in.
pays
yeah.
her-
And we're just gonna turn up at 10 o'clock. So get online and order it today and see if you can get in at 10 o'clock and join our group.
if you have any trouble, get a hold of me and I'll call the people we
I'll
know.
check with Betsy. The restaurant just sent me a note and said, glad to see me coming and all the rest of it. But I don't know how many tables Betsy booked, and I was gonna ask her that
We have
today.
14, now it'll be 15.
Yeah, but
Nobody will
we're
know.
not doing a party.
No.
She was booking tables. That's what we worked out, Bob, because they won't take us
I
to
know,
a party.
I know, I
You
know.
know, without charging us a bunch.
Well, we don't have to do it right here and now,
No.
because we gotta start the meeting, but no problem. We'll get you in somehow. Just plan to ride with your husband.
Get online.
Walt, what do we need to check? I can stop sharing here.
Please.
On the chat that you're muted.
That was then. It's fixed.
Do I need to get into my settings?
No, you're all right now.
What do I need to look at?
Look at participants in Zoom.
Oh,
Can I make a real quick plea for volunteers for the art show?
absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You'll be the halftime entertainment. Here. Here, it's on.
Before we start, I wanted to come to you and ask for volunteers. As many of you know, the art club puts on the spring art show, and that will be on the 19th of March. We put on the fall one, they put on the spring one.
No, you're not muted.
They provide volunteers for our
Must be an
show,
old
and
message.
I have some volunteer sign-up sheets.
Yeah, I think we're
For
good.
their show. I'm gonna come to you in January now, and February, and then in March as well, because they are gonna need some help. I'm gonna pass these around. I have three for, they need help for the hanging party setup and
Is this what
cleanup.
you're seeing at home?
They have one person signed up.
He
They're
will in a
gonna need
minute.
they're gonna need
No,
help
I'm
for
just
the
seeing
setup and
the
take down,
Brady
and they're
Bunch.
gonna need help for
Yeah, that-
counting the ballots for Best of Show. That's what we've got so far. I don't know if they're gonna do anything else besides that, but that's what they've got up so far.
Okay.
So
I'll
those are
put
the
that.
sheets that I brought over. So. Any of those things. Yeah, March 18th is the setup. March 18th is the hanging party help. And then the okay. So thank you if you can help. This won't be my last time begging for help. But they were very generous in giving us their help for and volunteering for our show. So we'd like to do the same thing for them. Okay.
Thank you, Charlene. Can somebody get the door for us? Thank you. Once we got you in here, we don't want to let you go. Just kidding. Anyway, good morning, boys and girls. I'm Bob Bennett, and you're not. Welcome to the Leisure World Photography Club meeting, regular Saturday meeting. Hopefully everybody signed in. We do need to defend our space, so make sure that you did sign in. If I can't report enough numbers, we're going to lose our space to some other club or something. We don't want that to happen. Please silence your cameras. I've already done that to mine. And any guests today? Everybody, yes.
Oh, no, you gotta do more than say yes. Chairman, he didn't sign in.
What do you want to know? Your name and mailer number.
Kevin Chef, 462.
Have your interest in photography?
Yeah, I like to take pictures. So,
You like to eat? You're in the right place.
He hikes with my hiking
Welcome.
group and he posts like 100 pictures. every
Right.
time.
Hey, welcome. If you need a membership application, see me after the show. Terrific. Okay. Any other guests? We have our own email group. We have our own website. We have a presence on Flickr, and we have a presence on Facebook. Our lockbox is a way we communicate with each other when in person won't, when electronic won't do. If you have pictures to drop off or checks to drop off, use the lockbox at Manor 2312. Here's our crew. These are the people that keep the door open, and I know you all appreciate them greatly. And I have good news. Michelle Reinhold has agreed to join the board as our education director. So please join me in welcoming Michelle. Welcome. She'll be directing our educational ventures. She'll be selecting the guest speakers, making all the arrangements with our guest speakers. She'll have tremendous input on educational videos and probably some, as you know, she's the author of our first 2 postcards in that series. So I think she'll bring a lot to the table education-wise for me. And I'd really like to welcome her aboard, and I'm glad that she said yes. Thank you. We would like to thank these people. We'd like to thank these people who are participating in the foundation exhibit. All the usual suspects, plus a lot of new ones, and we welcome all of this. We welcome all of you, and we're glad that you're showing. And last year, as you know, we held it virtually because of the COVID factor, but we're delighted to be back, and we hope that we keep getting invited by the Leisure World Foundation. So Charlene has your applications that you filled out. She has those in hand. Why, Jane, come on in. No problem. So anyway, the next step is to show up at 3 o'clock for hanging your stuff. No, I'm sorry. Volunteers show up at 3 to set up the panels. The hanging party starts at 4:30, and then the doors open at 5:30. Residents will be able to see our pictures from a half hour before and a half hour after the show. So thank you to all who are either contributing photographs or contributing your labor in setting up. We really appreciate it. There are setup sheets at the back. If you fail to get one before, you might need that as a cheat sheet for setup day, okay? All right, thank you. That's not too cool, okay. All right, the foundation we already talked about, got the board meeting coming up. The theme contest on February 12th. I hope you're all working on your street. In fact, I'll put out a sign-up sheet soon. Or is that? Yeah, that's something we need to do. So we know how many people are going to be participating. So we know how many panels to set up. And so I'll put out something on that. All right, and then Charlene mentioned the spring art show. We need to support that. Here's where we are today. We have a guest speaker today, Peter, who's waiting patiently for me to shut up. And we'll take care of that in a few minutes. Okay, this is the monthly challenge is twisted, and 8.5 by 11 or 8 by 10 photos are fine. And you can drop those in the mailbox or in the lockbox at 2312. That needs to be on the theme Twisted for January. The deadline is the 31st, and this is for the display contest. And you put up to 3 photos, and those are donated to the Banner Baywood after the competition, unless you put on the back that you need it back, in which case we honor that and be happy to do that.
I had a thank you note from Jenna from the hospital saying she loves the photographs. She will give them out to different people, but she especially loved the butterflies.
Oh, that's very nice. That's nice feedback. Thank you, Jen. And anyway, the perks are you get your work displayed in front of the residents, and you might win. And if you do, you'll show up on the post as a winner, and you get bragging rights. You also get a gold star, which actually is the most important part. Here's who has gold stars for Twisted so far, and we appreciate that. And just so you know, it's up to 3 photographs per person, not per manner. So if 2 people are in the same manner and they both want to turn in 3, that's okay too. It's by member, not by manner. So feel free to enter up to 3. Here's the weekly challenges. None today. Night photo next week. Clouds the next week. Rain, and then another guest speaker. Those are our challenges. The links will be sent. In fact, the night photo is already out there. We have 1 contributor already. So I'll be setting up the other links and sending those out for you for upload. Weekly activities. Today we have a guest speaker, Peter, who's waiting patiently. Next week's the video lesson, 4 kinds of light and landscape. Then we have the live photo shoot coming up February 5th for those foodaholics, foodies, and shooters.
Bob, on food court, is there a particular food that you want to have people bring in?
I think that finger foods mostly lend themselves because after we shoot it, then we're going to eat it. But if it's something like a beautiful chili or something, I guess as long as you had some little sample cups or something, I'll leave it up to you guys. I don't think we had any problems last time, did we? No. And we had, by the way, we had some beautiful arrangements. I think all of us were kind of, well, we shouldn't be surprised. We're artists, so we shouldn't have been surprised, but I was, to be honest with you. I was really pleased. And I anticipate the same thing will happen this time. So be thinking about what you want to bring. And like before, you'll get here early. You'll put it in set it up in the art studio, and then you come in here for the meeting. And then afterward, we go in there and shoot it and then eat it. And then we have a guest speaker again on February 19th, Beth Rijo York, who's an expert on night photography. So we'll look forward to that. And then today, without further ado, we've had our welcome, we've had our update. Now I'm going to introduce Peter. Peter Koskin is an outdoor and nature photographer who's a professional. He's been in various publications, Arizona Highways, Digital Mag, outdoor photographer, and he's won several awards, a lot of awards. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Peter. All right, hold on. You need my mouse or not? Probably not.
No. Should be all right.
I mean, Walt, do I need to reset the plate? If I do, I can do that. You want to do it?
I've got an HDMI connector directly.
Oh,
Get rid of your.
That's fine too. Thank you. And you saw that in the dark. That really.
There's enough light here. Besides, I'm all days used to working in a dark
Hold
room.
that first part. And that's why Walt's the technical director and I'm not.
See if I can get the screen share.
Oh, I know what's wrong. Yeah, let me. Rob has to stop sharing. Okay, now I'm going to take this to the. My plan was to take this to the back of the room because this is our live Zoom session. It went so well in dress rehearsal. That's why. Okay. Don't try this at home.
Up there.
Yeah, I got it. I'll show you how to share that. Now, then I get
Just have to do the screen share.
yeah, click on screen share. Pick this one. My first class. We didn't lose our Zoom connection, did we?
Kind of kicked me out for a second.
Here it is. Here it is. I got it. Is that you, Peter? Yeah, it probably is. No?
Yeah, I'm on the control now. Yikes. I'm an imposter. Should have,
Hang on, Peter. I can call it out to you. Hang on.
While we're waiting, can I ask a question about the amount of saturation you use in your pictures?
sure.
What do you usually go to?
I actually rarely use the actual saturation slider.
Right?
Pretty much all of my color work is done through a raw conversion and
Oh,
then using color balance, and then luminosity masks is a big one to get really good color separation too.
okay, thank you.
Also, being out when the light's really, really good helps a lot.
Okay, Peter, the meeting ID is 898-0512-0302. That's the meeting ID. When you're ready for the passcode, let me know.
doing now?
Just minimize that.
Okay.
Minimize that. I think
Let's see.
the top share. Stop share. And then maybe minimize that Zoom. Well, you know what? I think you got a double share. A triple share.
You make him the host.
Huh?
There you go.
Oh,
Well, I have to do the screen share.
I failed to make you a co-host. I think that's the issue. I think that might be the issue. Hang on.
Sorry for the technical delays.
Oh, no, they're used to it. Okay, you're
I'm
now
better with a camera than a computer, so.
a co-host, so you should be good to go. You can share your presentation now.
Okay, let's see.
I consider it's almost at the finish line. Are you kidding? This is terrific.
Okay, are we good? Okay, get this. Okay. I think we got all the technical stuff out of the way. So thank you for coming out this morning, and thank you to Bob for inviting me to come speak to you guys. My name's Peter, obviously. I do a lot of landscape, nature photography. I do wildlife photography as well. My strong suit is landscapes. That's what most people know me for. That's what I'm most passionate about. But you'll see kind of throughout this presentation, I'll kind of have a little bit of everything. And I do mean a little bit of everything when it comes to nature and landscapes and wildlife. So the topic for today is the anatomy of composition and creative approach. These two things are kind of the most important thing to me as a photographer. And they're things that really take a lot of time to learn. When I first started out, I got all the guidebooks you could possibly get on, the how-tos and photography. And one of the things I kept seeing, there's all these rules and all these things that you're supposed to do to create a good photograph. Well, I learned that you don't actually have to follow the rules and you can make even better photographs, but some of those rules will help you eventually be able to not have to rely on them so much. So this picture here, I actually took this in Yellowstone last January. It's just these frosted trees and these nice kind of mist coming off the thermal features. And what I liked about this composition in particular is that you have this kind of, let me get my little laser pointer. You have this little patch of light here that kind of points right up to these trees. And then the trees themselves kind of point up into this nice golden mist. Very simple composition. I kind of just pointed at it and I saw the light and the way the mist was. I took 2 shots of this scene, and the second shot, the trees were completely covered in mist and you couldn't see anything. So a lot of times it just depends on, getting that shot right at the right time. So the actual definition of composition, according to dictionary.com, is the act of combining parts or elements to form a whole. When it comes to photography, I feel like that's kind of vague. So I rearranged it, and this is my definition here: arranging and organizing specific elements within a scene that creates balance and pleases the eye. Easier said than done. This picture here is not a very traditional composition because there's not really a foreground, background, or middle ground. It's kind of just all one. But shooting this particular tree, I had to find what part of the tree looked best compositionally that didn't have as much clutter. And obviously, it's very chaotic, branches going all over the place. But if I had gone any higher, if I kept shooting up top here, I wouldn't have this nice orange and pinks down here. If I went any lower, I wouldn't have the nice pinks and purples. And there is a lot of vegetation and leaves and stuff that made it a lot more distracting. So really confining the elements within that scene that's the most pleasing, that's the goal of, getting a nice clean composition. And I think there's two types of compositions. You have a simple composition and you have a complex composition. Simple is kind of just, you don't have a whole lot of elements to play with. You're specifically shooting one thing. This mountain scene here, it's basically just about the way the light plays with it. You have these nice zigzags here, and then this cloud here. That's all I wanted to shoot on this scene. And you had these nice clouds in the back that kind of gave it that depth. So you have almost these this X here, and it's just very simple. It's all about the light in that aspect. On the one on the right here, there's a lot going on. And normally I wouldn't have something so far to the right that kind of goes out of the frame. But because I have these mountains here, it kind of balanced out this big foreground element. And then you have these nice kind of verticals with the saguaros and organ pipes here. This composition actually, I found it and I saw this dead organ pipe skeleton, and I wasn't even pointing back here. I was looking at it in a different direction, but nothing really jumped out at me compositionally. So I turned around and I saw the mountains and I figured, okay, well, you have a nice balance here in the corner, and then you have the mountain up here, and then you have all these nice greens and reds here that kind of contrast together. This was just before the spring flower bloom, which kind of bummed me out a little bit because I really wanted to get, the carpets of flowers. But the greens kind of made a nice contrast to the nice sunset that I had. So like I said, it's more than just foreground, middle ground, background. In the rule books, you have the rule of thirds, which is actually a nice tool to use in the beginning because it helps you kind of organize in layers. So here, this picture is from the Superstition Mountains. This is one of my most popular photographs I've made. It's also one of the ones that a lot of photographers like to copy off of. It's not a super hard place to get to, but you kind of have to know where to look for it. So you have your foreground here, these two cactus, then you have your midground here, and then you have your background, the mountain peak. So compositionally, based on the rule book, you have your nice level rule of thirds, but there's a lot more to that I always look for. And here, you have the complementary colors between the sky, the mountain, and the cactus. So you have those reds that kind of play with each other. And then the balance. Balance is a really big thing in composition because if you have something that overweighs another part of your image, it's going to be very distracting. If I had lowered my angle of position, compositionally, maybe a half a foot or even a foot, these cactus would end up right here and you would have no middle ground. It would just be this and this. So having that middle ground that kind of separate it and give it some balance is a really important aspect. So like I said, the color separation, you have these nice greens and then you have the reds. And as you mentioned earlier, you're asking about the hue and saturation. That's a lot of color balance work. And doing it through layers in Photoshop, luminosity masks, and just blending multiple layers to get those colors and that separation. And make sure you don't have empty space. Empty space distracts your eyes and you'll just go right out of the frame. If this cactus here had any extra, little arms or anything that reached out this way, your eyes would automatically kind of go that way because you want to see the rest of the cactus. But because it's nice and whole in here and nice and whole in here, you can kind of look straight up and you don't have any of that empty space. The only part of this image that I feel might be a little distracting is this little rock here. But I think if I had taken that out, you'd have an even bigger empty space in this corner here or this side. Now the perspective, kind of like I mentioned just a little bit ago, if I had lowered myself a little further, the perspective of this would look totally different. This barrel cactus here and this Troya cactus, they'd be either really, really, really big and overwhelming the whole foreground here, or if I was even higher up, you'd have a little too much midground. And you, like I said, that balance, you want to have it nice and evenly separated. So you have foreground, midground, background, and then no empty space. And then visual flow. Visual flow is one of those things that you just kind of have to see it. A lot of that's with leading lines, which I'll kind of get into in a little bit here. But basically, you have these rocks here that kind of point up to the cactus, and then the cactus has this vertical diagonal sway here. And then these saguaros kind of point right up to the mountain. So you have this flow that kind of leads you right up through the frame. If I had shot this horizontally, you wouldn't have that at all, because you'd have all this empty space here that's just, you know, either a bunch of saguaros that's like this, and this wouldn't feel as impactful. And then the counterpoint. So counterpoint is when you have something that's opposite of one another, basically. So with this barrel cactus, this peak is the tallest point in the picture, but the barrel cactus is the lowest point. The cholla here, it's not as low, but it kind of mimics the low point of this peak here. And again, that kind of goes back to the whole balance thing. You have a nice balanced composition, but also the counterpoint where you have, you know, a low and a high, and then a low and a low, or low high, basically. Kind of hard to explain that one a little bit, but. And then contrasting foreground elements. Obviously, they're not two of the same. You have a nice separated color, and different textures as well. And having that kind of separation can really help that visual flow, because you're not just focused on one certain, you know, point of interest. It's multiple points of interest, and that helps you guide through the photo, which when you get to the payoff, it's that nice, beautiful sky. Nice, colorful sky that, you know, complements the rest of the scene, the foreground, everything else about it. The other thing with this particular scene and composition in general is always look in every direction, because you could have even better compositions behind you, next to you. The light might be a lot better behind you, so you want to switch your position if you're focused on the light. That actually happens more times than I can count at this particular spot. I mean, this is pretty much right behind my house, and I visited, you know, almost hundreds of times by now. And out of those hundreds of visits, I've maybe had 4 really, really nice sunrises and sunsets. So constantly getting back out there and trying, eventually you'll get it. But a lot of times I'll shoot scenes that are not pointed at this mountain, which a lot of people come to see that particular peak. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. So a color cast would be if you have a really vibrant sunrise or sunset, you know, really rich reds. A lot of times those reds get cast down onto the overall landscape. So if you had, without color separation, a lot of this here, all these greens would be more orange and yellow and red. That's why you want to get that color separation, because it'll help with that visual flow. A lot of color casts tend to be magenta and yellow. You can also get green and blue, kind of the main colors. But a lot of times with sunrise and sunset, when you have those really fiery reds, the rest of your scene is going to have that kind of shade of red over everything else. So trying to get that separation is really important. Any other questions for this one? And now the leading lines in visual flow. So these are 2 very different pictures, obviously. The one on the left was taken in Yellowstone, and that's probably my favorite picture I took all of last year. The colors, the different tones, and you have that nice mist in the blues, but the visual line goes all the way up from the bottom, all the way to the top like a snake. S-curves are a really good way to get those leading lines in visual flow. A lot of times it's streams, water sources. It could be an arrangement of sticks on the ground or leaves, trail, anything that kind of leads you through a frame. That's what you want. But you don't want the top, you don't want your end point to be somewhere, you know, right over here where you're not paying attention to the top. So you want to make sure if you're having, especially a vertical, that your leading line goes all the way from the bottom, all the way to the top. You don't want it to go from here and then end here, or go from here and then end, you know, in the middle. You want to be able to enjoy all of the scene has to offer. If you do that, you'll have good visual flow, and it's almost guaranteed that you'll have somebody that's able to read the picture and know what they're supposed to be looking at and how to read the top bottom. Now, on this side, we have these sand dunes. Now, it's not a traditional way of leading lines, but you have all these layers that kind of conform, they get kind of smaller towards the top. And again, that payoff. So you have these big sweeping dunes here that just kind of zigzag, and then they form this kind of peak here. And then you have this golden light that kind of helps accentuate all the way to the top. When I took this picture, it was the 600mm lens. These are the types of images that I tend to gravitate more towards lately. I don't shoot as much wide angle stuff as I used to. There's very few wide angle scenes that jump out at me, and I think that's part of the creative process. In fact, when I looked at this picture after I edited it and put it together, this is actually, I think, 11 frames that I had to focus stack because you have different focal points that I had to make sure they were all nice and sharp. But this section here, I kind of wish I shot that by itself because the layers just have these nice, curves, and it just leads you right all the way up. Here, you still have that nice light and shadow and the curves that lead you up, but I like a lot of layers. And even though there's a lot of layers in this, it's these small details that you start to pay attention to compositionally. So this is in Death Valley National Park, surprisingly in the Mesquite Dunes, which are the most populated dunes. But a lot of people in Death Valley, they tend to go to where the parking lot is. The good thing about Death Valley is you can park on the side of the road as long as there's a safe place and you can hike in from the road, which is what I tend to do here. You'll have to walk a lot further, but it's definitely worth it to avoid all the footprints. There might have been maybe one or two that I had to get rid of, but for the most part, if you stay maybe a half mile away from the main area of the dunes, you'll find really nice, fresh dunes like this. And then you don't have to worry about going in Photoshop and going 100% or 500% to clone out the little footprints. And kind of with that last one, the focal length. Focal length is a big thing with composition because you can really alter your composition very, very significantly. As you can see here, it's the same scene. This one was at 165mm. And, it's nice conditions, but this is what I saw. And fortunately, I had my 150 to 600 on, so I was able to zoom in a little more and isolate just this frame here. And what I liked about this particular frame is you have these silhouetted saguaros, and then you have these clouds that kind of make this X, but they're weaving in and out of the hills here. And all of this is covered in snow. And when you really look at a large print of this, you can see the details. I mean, there's some nice saguaros right here, and you can see the bushes and all that stuff in the snow detail in these hills back here. But when you look at the wider view, see how quickly the clouds change. I mean, you don't have as much separation, especially compared to here, compared to there. So waiting for that right moment, but knowing what you're looking for. I saw these layers here. I saw this layer and I saw this layer. And they make that kind of nice X, but with that cloud moving in, and then these clouds here, it gives it a nice added depth and atmosphere. And atmosphere is one of those things that you can create it in Photoshop, but it's much more fulfilling when you see it in real life. And a lot of times that's coming with storms, winter storms, rainstorms. In fact, if you came outside today, you see how spectacular the sky looks. Most of my non-photographer friends, they're like, oh, it's a really, crappy day outside. Me, I'm like, I want to be outside all day long photographing the sky and all it has to offer because there's so many nice patterns and details in there. And then the other thing on the wider one is that negative space. So you'd have all this negative space here, and then in the sky here, there's really nothing of interest in the sky. You have some nice kind of streaks of clouds, but it doesn't add to the overall scene. So when you kind of compress it together and use the focal length to compress it together, you can create a much more appealing image overall. And this is one of my favorite pictures as well. This was taken in 2019 on the Apache Trail on a section that is now closed off because of the landslide there. So I felt really fortunate to have made this picture. This was on New Year's Day 2019 when we had tons of snow for like 2 months. And the best part is I had this whole scene to myself. There was not a single other person out there, surprisingly, and the conditions were as unique and as amazing as I've ever seen in the superstitions. So use those long lenses. Don't just keep, you know, a wide angle or 70 to 200. Start investing in something bigger. And then you have this idea of what is it going to look better in, vertical or horizontal? Now, naturally, we kind of see horizontally. You know, our eyes see this nice kind of panoramic view. We don't see vertically as easily. Just a show of hands, who thinks the one on the left is better than the one on the right? Okay, and who thinks the one on the right is better than the one on the left? That's interesting. I like them both too. And they both work. They're both, you know, the same scene, but when you shoot them both ways, they kind of do different things. So on the vertical one, you have this nice curve of these prickly pears that lead, again, that leading line, it doesn't have to be a stream or anything. Use actual objects and you can have this nice leading line. And then you have the striations of this peak that leads you right to the moon. And that's the payoff. You know, you have this nice sky with the moon there and the moonrise, but you also have these nice, beautiful wildflowers and these cactus here. On the horizontal one, you know, you have this kind of balance on both sides with the flowers. But the one thing that I noticed with the horizontal one is sometimes this whole prickly pear kind of feels dominant, but you still get this nice kind of X because you have the flowers that come up here, and you have flowers that come up here. Now that creates a little bit of tension because if you're trying to, you know, come up to a specific payoff, the moon's not center above the peak, which is where you'd probably want it to be in a horizontal shot like this. In the vertical, it makes sense because you can go zigzag up and there it is. In the horizontal, you have these X's and maybe this side you can get the moon, but I feel like to balance that out, the moon would have been better off in the middle. Still, both good pictures, a good wildflower bloom. And that's one thing, especially if you're doing zoom stuff, longer focal lengths, that becomes more of a challenge because then you have to do focus stacking, or you have to, you know, use hyperfocal distance, which is even tougher to do with the telephoto lens. With a wide angle lens, not so much. You can get away with one shot, but zooming in, you know, if you're, you know, 50 millimeters or longer, you're going to need to use multiple focus points and then stack them together in Photoshop. So with the, you mean the vertical? Yeah, so with the horizontal, I think I was kind of almost at the same, maybe a little higher on this one. And that just might be based on the way my tripod was set up. If you're using an L bracket, a lot of times, you know, you're just switching it from side to vertical, and you're not getting too much of a difference of angle, maybe a couple inches at most. I could have also used a slightly longer focal length on this one, just a little bit to zoom in and really isolate the peak here, you know, not have so much, you know, this curve here. If you look at where this is cut off, it's pretty much right here. So if I had any more of that curve, then I might, you know, not have as good visual flow. So now we're seeing a lot of grand compositions, you know, the big, bold ones that we all chase after. But over the years, I've come to really appreciate these smaller scenes. They tend to evoke a lot of emotion, in my opinion, especially the way that you can compose them. However, they're not like a traditional image. You know, you don't necessarily have a straight foreground, middle ground, background. In fact, this particular image here, there's only maybe this part here and this part here are the only parts that are actually in focus. So using, you know, really fast aperture to get that blur and bokeh in the background here to blur these leaves out kind of helps these other leaves pop out, and that's what you're focused on. And again, here's that kind of counterpoint. So you have this little section down here and then this little section down up here. So you have that balance. So you have one on the bottom, one on the top, and that'll create that balance. And then the color palette, you know, what do you feel when you see this image based on the color palette? Kind of warm and inviting, calm maybe, If it was, fiery reds and, greens, maybe something a little different. But the way you can use color and composition can really alter the mood and the atmosphere of the image. But you also want to have that depth. And that depth is having all those extra blurry leaves back there. So you want to look for those patterns and that repetition throughout these smaller scenes. That's really the only way you're going to be able to find really solid compositions with those smaller scenes. They're definitely harder to shoot, especially as someone who has focused primarily on wide angle landscapes and grand landscapes over the years. The past couple of years, I've tried focusing more on these types of images, and it's really difficult when your mindset is usually on those big grand vistas. So it's a good challenge too, to challenge yourself and find these smaller compositions. And you don't have to go far. I mean, you could probably find something, maybe not, aspen leaves or fall colors, but you could probably find something out in the parking lot and use it as a composition. If anybody has a canister of gasoline that they spill in the parking lot, it'll look really spectacular in the right light. And I think the next slide will kind of show what I'm talking about. Any questions on that one? Okay. So again, with the smaller scenes, this image here, these are plant oils. And this overall scene is maybe 4 inches wide, maybe 2 inches tall. In the fall, one of the things I always look for, especially in canyons where there's fall colors, is these pools of water that collect these leaves. And what happens with the leaves is they start decomposing, and the colors that were on the leaves, they start making these colorful film oils, and they cover these little puddles of water. And you can only see them in the right light. I mean, you'll pass by them tons of times, but they're one of my favorite things to photograph and look for because they're always challenging. But they also create some of the most spectacular patterns and colors in nature. And again, these are all natural colors, but you can get the same thing if you poured a bottle of gasoline in a parking lot and then angled yourself appropriately. You might not get as nice, patterns and details, but you'll get the same type of colors. Now with this one, what I liked about this composition is that it kind of divides itself. You have this one section here that has a lot of these kind of speckled patterns and colors. And then up here, you have these more vibrant, put together colors, and then these kind of ripples that create texture. And like I said, with the last frame, that depth, it's a lot harder to do that depth when you only have something that's flat and, nothing behind it. But those textures are what's creating depth. So you have these nice little details in here, and your eyes kind of go up through here and then a little bit over here. And you have all these different shapes and patterns and stuff. And I called this one unicorn because if you really look at it, kind of looks like the head of a unicorn. You have the eye there, and then somewhere over here would have been the horn. Maybe it's this section here. Now on this other picture, this is from the ancient bristlecone pine forest in California. Has anyone ever been there? It's one of the most spectacular places I've ever been. It's about 11,000 feet up in elevation. Kind of tough to breathe up there, but the trees, these are the oldest living organisms on Earth. And these trees are just spectacular. And for any photographer, it's just like a playground because you have these really gnarled trees that you can shoot wide, you can shoot zoomed in. You have some really expansive views over the mountains and the Sierras. And then you have these nice smaller scenes that you can really appreciate the details and the textures. The ancient bristlecone pine forest in California, it'll be in the White Mountains. It's usually closed in the winter because they get a ton of snow. A photographer friend of mine, he tends to like to go up there in the winter and snowshoe up. I think he's crazy because I wouldn't be able to breathe at all in the wintertime up there. I have hard enough time as it is in the summertime. But you have these nice leading lines here that kind of, this is one of those rare instances where you kind of have a nice vertical flow and a horizontal composition because you have this branch that leads up and then you have this corner that leads up too. And then you have these strong verticals here and strong verticals here. And this one is just full of texture. And one of my favorite things about these trees is you can see the history in them. A lot of them, you can see where they've been struck by lightning. All these dark gray and black marks, that's being struck by lightning and fire. And these trees have survived for 5,000 years in all those types of environments. So they're really, really cool trees to photograph. But it's also one of those places that really makes you think, because there's so many compositional abilities and capabilities over there. Like I said, you have super wide angle compositions you can do here, but a lot of those you kind of want good light. I was here on a day where it was kind of just clear blue, but we had that nice kind of late afternoon light kind of filtering in, and that's how you're getting this nice kind of golden amber colors here. And then that color separation with these kind of gray blues here, that'll kind of help separate the different layers in this picture. And storytelling through composition. This is a big one. A lot of times I find that it's not so much the grand landscapes that tell a great story, it's these more kind of simple, intimate images. This particular image here is in Yellowstone from last winter. And what I really liked about this one, I had shot this light beam in all different places, running around like a mad person, because I was hoping, you know, I'd get as much as I could out of it while it was still visible. And this light beam doesn't last all day long. It only lasts for maybe 10, 15 minutes at most. And it kind of changes its angle a little bit. And if you have clouds, then it kind of disappears, and then you think you're done, then you have to wait for it to come back. So we were actually walking back to our snow coach, and I saw this beam right over this tree here. I didn't even think about this at the first second, but the beam was coming right down on this tree. And when you blow this up pretty big, it looks like a Christmas tree. There's all sorts of colors of the speckled, they call it diamond dust. It wasn't snowing on this day, but it was so cold that you have these ice crystals in the air that start falling down. But yet it almost looked like Christmas tree ornaments all throughout this tree. And then once I saw that, then I saw this little tree, and that was the story. This little tree up on this cliff, looking down at this big tree with this light beam, as if, you know, my time is going to come eventually. So storytelling, something like that. And, you know, you want to create a story with feeling and emotion. That doesn't work so well with those grand wide angle dramatic scenes as much. I mean, obviously a monsoon storm, you kind of know the story. You're going to get pounded with rain or struck by lightning. It's one of those two options, or you're going to get consumed by a dust storm. It's three options. But when you have these kind of more intimate scenes, I think they tell a better story, and they're usually more interesting stories. And then using scale for impacting your compositions, this is one of maybe my second favorite image of all time. This was taken on a houseboat trip with Arizona Highways back in 2016. And this was a very kind of emotional trip for me. The day I got on the boat, my dad was having heart surgery. But he said to me, make an image for me on this trip. So I think this was maybe the third day we were on the boat, and we came across this alcove, and we went in this alcove, and it was massive. I mean, this thing was like an amphitheater. You could put a concert hall in there and it would just be amazing. The acoustics too would be just spectacular. But nobody was walking up to the dune. As you can see here, there's a person here, very small person. But the only way I knew I was going to get a picture that was worth anything from this alcove was if I had that scale, because there's no way without that person that you'd be able to tell what's going on here. Basically, you have this big sand dune in the middle of this alcove that's been carved out for, I don't know how long, millions of years. And you have this huge amphitheater ceiling that just glows. This lit area is where we came in through. So the boat's parked behind the dune here. So that light coming in, that's all reflected light coming off of the opposing canyon wall. And when we got to the back of the wall, I mean, this was a super wide angle shot too. This is 14 millimeters, which is as wide as I've ever gone. And we got all the way crammed up to the back of the alcove, where I'm hitting my head on the sandstone and trying to figure out, you know, how am I going to compose this and make it work? So eventually I asked one of the people on our trip, I'm like, hey, do you mind hiking up there and, you know, and seeing, you know, if we could get a picture? Fortunately, there were some less non-photographers on the trip that were more there for a vacation as opposed to taking photographs. So one of the members of our group, she decided to hike up there. We actually had 2 people hike up there, but the first person only got about right here. And I knew I needed somebody more to the top. So she hiked up, and all of a sudden, every person in our group came right around me, set their tripods up, put their wide angle lens on, and they started firing away. And I remember I was with Suzanne Mathia. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a friend of mine. She actually let me use the lens to take this picture. And we're just sitting there, and she's just like, you know what? I think you started something special here. So this is on Lake Powell, I believe the Escalante arm. So it's a haul on a boat, which right now the lake levels are extremely low. So I don't even know if you can get here still. I know some people that have known about this area, they've been able to hike into it, but I mean, that's a long hike. You're backpacking in at that point. But yeah, just a really spectacular shot. And with that scale, you're also telling a story. And the story I had for this one kind of was a more personal one. And it was kind of, you know, with the person that they're not quite at the top of the dune, but they're getting there. And, you know, with my dad having a surgery that week, you know, I was like, okay, we're going to overcome this. So the whole story with this one is overcoming something and triumph. That could change depending on who's viewing it. You know, the story is always up to the viewer, but if you have it told in a certain way, sometimes people see the same story. I mean, if you read a book, sometimes you think it's going one way, and then you watch the movie and it's totally different. So different type of storytelling. This is my favorite photograph I've ever made. It's also one that has won awards. I actually have a book up here. It's the Outdoor Photographer American Landscape Contest book. This was the picture that won in 2018. You can see it. I have the book up here, open to the page, so when it's done, you can come look at it. So this particular trip, I had gone in 2015, and I had this idea of what I wanted to photograph. I knew I wanted to photograph these mossy vine maple trees. I knew that's what I wanted to photograph. I wanted to photograph waterfalls. And an idea I had was finding a way to frame a waterfall with those trees. And I spent 2 weeks there, and I thought I wasn't going to get anything that I had thought I wanted. I was getting the waterfalls, I was getting the trees, but none of them came together. Then on this particular hike, a friend of mine invited me down. I wasn't even anticipating going here because the waterfall itself, there's a more popular scene that would be kind of over here on the other side of the creek. And that's what they wanted to photograph. I wasn't as inspired by that image to make the hike down, but I did it anyways. And I am glad I did, because I didn't get anything from that side, and I thought it was just gonna be this long, grueling hike. I mean, you're hiking maybe 3.5 miles down, and then you have to go down this steep, muddy cliff, grabbing on the tree branches, making sure you can make it back up. A little disappointed. I decided, you know what, the creek is really low. Usually it's, you know, high flow because of spring. This was an unusually dry year for the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon. And I decided I'm gonna go across the creek and see if I can find something. Within maybe 10 feet of crossing the creek, I turned around and I see this tree just framing this waterfall. And I stopped and I said something a little different than, oh my God, but it was one of those things that it just clicked. I saw it and it clicked. And then the one thing that clicked for me is this branch leading way up, and then it kind of comes down a little bit, but then the waterfall picks it back up and then it brings it back down. And you have this nice kind of, you know, it keeps you going, looking and looking and looking. And if anybody's ever photographed a forest or a rainforest, it's incredibly difficult to organize the chaos that it is. Obviously, you can see all these, you know, ferns and leaves and all these other trees that are kind of just trying to break in and make it distracting. But having this nice lead in with that moss coming up and around and framing that waterfall, and then at the top of this canyon here, the light started filling in. So you had this nice kind of golden light kind of just cascading down into this canyon, providing a little bit of a contrast to the color. This picture was also the most difficult I've ever had to process. It literally took me a month to process this one image. Usually it takes me about 45 minutes to an hour tops, but this one is a very special one. And one of the things that this kind of reminded me of is a lot of times when you go to a place, you might get frustrated like I did because you're not going to come away with anything different or unique. So what I started doing is I started just slowing myself down, really looking at everything on my way on a hike, just anything, even driving around, just really looking and studying what's happening in a scene. And a lot of times you'll see something nobody else has seen. This picture, I showed the one person I was with, and he looked at this composition and said, "You have the most unique shot of this place I've ever seen." And that's saying a lot, because a lot of my favorite photographers, they've spent decades just in this creek alone, and not once have they ever photographed this tree. And it was just right across the creek of a very, 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 very popular composition that people would rip off of another photographer. So ironically, only a few people tried to attempt copying this one. It actually cannot be duplicated anymore. I had a friend that went out there in 2017. He said all the moss here was stripped off. They also had a fire. I don't know if it actually damaged the tree itself, but I know this scene will no longer look like this in this state. So I feel very fortunate to have found it when I did, photographed it when I did, and having that idea to continue on and, you know, find what I was hoping to photograph. And that's that vision and that creativity. You know, you think of an idea and you want to execute that idea. It doesn't always work, but when it does, a lot of times it's going to pay off like that. You don't want to have tunnel vision either. You'll get stuck on just shooting the same thing everyone else does, and you'll never have anything that's unique to you. You know, you want to find photos that are yours, that speak to you. And that's a really, really important thing with landscape photography. And wildlife photography, it's a little different because, you know, you're kind of working with what the animal gives you. Landscapes, you know, this tree was sitting here for I don't know how long, not doing anything, just sitting there, waiting to be photographed. And I came out and I photographed it, I found it. And if I had not shot another picture in those 2 weeks except that one, I would have been completely happy. So, yes. So I believe this one, I actually have it in the book here. 1.6 seconds. So a little longer than I would usually do for a waterfall, but this is another image that I had to focus stack because I was incredibly close to this foreground element here. In fact, this part is actually not super tack sharp, which bugs me a little bit, but I've tried reprocessing this like over and over and I can never get it back to how it looked here. So I'm okay with that little softness in here because when you're visually looking at something, you know, your perspective kind of has something blurry. You know, if you're looking straight ahead at your hand right here and you focus on your finger, your palm's going to be a little blurry. So I think that's okay. You can have those kind of mistakes, I would say. But I know some people, they tend to use those blurry aspects as creative aspects, which you can do too. And that kind of intimate shot with the leaves and, you know, it's nice red and golds. That's the same thing. You know, you're just focusing on a certain way. And having that little bit kind of soft kind of helps you guide through even better, really, because it's more natural to how your eye might see it. Even though this was taken with a 17mm lens, your eyes see it much, you know, longer than that, but it's more natural to the eye when you have a little bit of blur or out of focus areas. Yes. Go ahead.
I've been told before that it's not good to have your main image in the middle, that you should offset it or, you know, and this looks great in the middle, so.
Remember what I said about rules in the beginning?
Yeah.
Toss them out the window. This is why, you know, rules are good in a sense up to a certain point. When you start getting to that creative and, you know, you want to be more creative, you have to break the rules. There's just no way around it. If you stick to the rules, you're never going to show that creative side that everyone has. Everyone has a creative side. Just know that. So this is actually a recent image I took. This was in Aravaipa Canyon. I have gone through this scene numerous times, just, hiking in the same canyon, passing the same spot. And I always sit here for a few minutes and I just kind of sit and look at the scene. I mean, it's just a really simple, beautiful set of fall colors. These trees just have this nice grayish blue tint to them. And I had shot it just, in focus first. And then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna play with some, long shutter speeds. I do this every fall. I like using motion blur. A lot of times it creates these more abstract painterly type images. And I've always heard, people say photography is not art, it's not painting. So this is my way of making a painting, but I'm using the camera instead of the paintbrush. The thing with the composition here is you have strong verticals and then you kind of have them fan out. Remember that bristlecone pine shot, it was kind of coming up from here in the corners. This one kind of branches out to the top. And then you have these nice splashes of color that, separate the blues over here and just a nice textured detail. If you look at this really big, you'll still see some detail in the leaves and the branches themselves. But because I used a shutter speed just slow enough and moving it up and down on my tripod and keeping that strong vertical, I was able to get that painterly look. It's a really fun thing to try actually, and it helps with your creativity, I think. But I also feel like it helps enhance a mood of a scene. I called this one Tranquility, and one of my friends, he looked at it and he said it looked more foreboding to him. So it just depends on, like I said, who's looking at the scene and what story does it tell? How does it make you feel? Everyone's going to have a different feeling based on what they're looking at. So that sense of movement is also adding to that mood of the image. Very subtle. I mean, maybe an inch at most. And just keeping it, you're on a tripod, but you're moving it. So you want to keep it vertical, and you only have to do it very quickly because your shutter speed is not going to be super long. So as long as your shutter speed is, that's how long you want to have that motion. And a lot of times you only want it to be, just like an inch or at most. You can do it longer and get really nice painterly streaks. I had an image that I lost from the North Rim. It was from a couple falls ago, and it had these beautiful colors. It was like, red, gold, green, orange aspens. And I did the same technique, but a longer shutter speed. And they were more streaked up and vertical. And it kind of looked like, I don't know how to explain it, but I see these advertisements all the time. They take these movies and then they compress them down, all the scenes, and then they just look like these stripes of color. That's what it looked like. And it just had this nice, it was like a rainbow pretty much. But, you still had those strong verticals in there. I had a hard drive crash, and I was able to get most of it recovered. That was one of the images that I lost. So always back up your stuff. Oh yeah. Go ahead. I would say 90% of the time. When I'm doing landscape or that kind of, more intimate stuff, you kind of have to a little bit because you're using slower shutter speeds. A lot of the newer cameras today, they have in-camera image stabilization, and some of them you can handhold for up to a second. And a lot of that stuff, like this one here, this might have been maybe like a second and a half. And you could probably do the same thing hand holding with this. But on a tripod, at least you can have that, stability to keep it vertical when you're moving it up. If you're just kind of hand holding it, you might tilt it one way or another while you're, going up and down. But for the most part, I do use a tripod. If I'm doing wildlife photography, it's a lot of handheld stuff, but landscapes and these types of images, it's pretty much all tripod. Any other questions? No. and then using that same technique on wildlife. I only have one more slide after this, and it's another wildlife shot, but compositionally, this tells a story, in my opinion, because you have this ground here. Instead of having the bird just kind of be in that nice twilight, you have this context of it's either taking off or landing. I believe it was landing because this was around after sunset. So all the sandhill cranes were coming in. This was at Whitewater Draw down in southern Arizona. If you ever want to see thousands and thousands and thousands of sandhill cranes, that's the place to go if you don't want to go all the way to New Mexico. This particular one, I panned while doing a slow shutter speed. I think it was maybe 1/30th of a second, and this was at 600 millimeters. So you're panning with a big lens and just getting enough detail to know what it is you're looking at. But at the same time, you kind of have this shadow coming out, and that's what I consider the spirit of this bird. So those slow shutter speeds, you can use them for multiple uses in nature. And for wildlife photography, I think it makes it really more moody. It provides more of a story because you show that movement. With trees, trees move, they sway side to side, but they don't necessarily go up and down. So when you're doing those slow shutter speeds going up and down, you're focused on getting that painterly look. You're not really focused on the actual movement of the trees. However, you are kind of getting that breeze going back and forth depending on how it turns out. On the wildlife stuff, those shutter speeds will show that movement because the animal is always moving, unless it's just sitting doing nothing. But who wants to shoot that, So this is my last slide. So this red fox, this was in Yellowstone. And I remember we had seen the fox the night before, and it was much closer than, I could have shot it with a wide angle lens right outside the window, but it was dark. And I don't like shooting wildlife when it's dark. So we kind of came back the same way the next day, and we noticed this orange thing on the top of this hill. Turns out it was the same fox in the same area. And everyone wanted to rush out and, try to photograph the fox and get it, nice and close. I kind of just sat there and waited and see what it was going to do. And I tend to like these kind of more environmental portraits where it shows the animal in context to its landscape. I could have just easily cropped it even further and just got this, but then you don't get any of this, these textures and details. And then you have this light that kind of leads up to the fox. Now, a lot of people would say, well, why did you split it in half essentially? Why? Because I break the rules. Easy. But this fox, it stood at the top of this hill, and eventually it just kind of looked at us for 2 seconds, and it decided to go one way or the other, and it decided to go on the other side of the hill, out of our view. So that's why I titled it The Pondering Fox, because either it wanted to come see us and see if we had a special snack for it, which we didn't. I don't feed wildlife. It decided, no, I'll find something better, and it went off into the hills. But compositionally, you can use a lot of the same techniques with wildlife photography as you can with landscape and overall nature photography. So when you're ever out in the field, just kind of slow it down a little bit and really just look and see what speaks out to you. You might have, if you're going to the Grand Canyon, everyone wants to shoot this big grand vista, right? Well, the next time you go to the Grand Canyon, don't take your wide angle lens. Take the longest focal length you have and just stick that on there and see what happens. Because I guarantee you will come back with more fulfilling photos than you've ever taken at the Grand Canyon. So that's it for my presentation. A little shameless promotion. I do sell prints. I do offer one-on-one photo workshops. I like to keep them one-on-one because I can get more time with my clients, and as opposed to a group where everyone's fighting for attention. So all your attention is focused on you. I do image licensing. So if you have a company that needs something for a brochure or something, I might have something for you. Speaking engagements, obviously I'm standing up here. And then I'm also a Photo Pro Tripods ambassador. So this is my tripod here. That's a heavy duty tripod, very heavy duty. But if you are looking for a tripod, you can save 15% off on my website. My website below is pjcphotography.com. About those tripods, they have a number of different models. The model I use is called the Global Elite series, and they're kind of designed for those more rugged environments. I beat my tripods like crazy, but this one, I beat it and it still works as good as I've ever had a tripod. And I don't clean my tripods, so my old tripod is full of dust. This one, it's been through everything and it works as good as new. So if you do need a new tripod or you're looking for a tripod, feel free to reach out. But that's pretty much it I got today. Yes. Yes, they're all out in the field, and I have different levels. You know, if you just want to do a sunrise or a sunset, or if you want to do a full day, which includes kind of some post-processing techniques and stuff, and more kind of classroom work as well. I'm in Gold Canyon. In fact, actually, if you have nothing to do today, they have the art show today. I have a couple friends that are presenting. I would have been there, but my friend, he's using the booth that I would have borrowed from him. So he's doing the show over there. There's some good photographers out there and some good artists. So if you have nothing to do today, it's definitely worth a drive. And it's only today, so. Thank you.